Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. What are we talking about when we say sin? We have sinned before God. This evening I want to look at the face of sin, the ugly face of sin. What does it look like? Jesus died for the sins of the world. He died for the sins of our past. He died for the sins of the present, and He also died for the sins of the future. But what is the face of sin? What does it look like? If you and I would like to see the face of sin, then we have to look at the torture and experience of Jesus from the Garden of Gethsemane to the courts of the chief priests, to the courts of Pilate and Herod, and then the journey Jesus took via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, from the old city of Jerusalem to Calvary, the Mount of Skulls. In the Garden of Gethsemane, you will see the face of betrayal. That is the ugly face of sin. Look at what Judas did to Jesus. He led a group of soldiers to where Jesus was. He kissed Jesus as if he loved him, and he betrayed his friend. Judas was with him all the time. Physical proximity does not guarantee emotional and psychological closeness. There is a huge divide, the ugly face of sin, betrayal. Now if we look at the violence happening in Manipur, the famous slogan is Ching Tam Amatani, the hill and valley are one. That is the magic phrase of many people. We even have rice hotels of Ching Tam Rice Hotel. People had been living as neighbors for decades and centuries. There had been intermarriages going back several generations with children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Neighbors have exchanged their fish and meat curries, their kang soys, their sinjus, their ironbas. But what is happening now? Neighbors betraying neighbors. There is a complete breakdown of relationship. Of course, there may be still some good friends. But my point is, communal affiliation has become greater at this point of time. People who have lived together for decades are now coming with mobs to burn down your houses and vehicles. People whom you know and you have shared a meal or two are now coming for your very life. Many people have died because of betrayal. Many people are battling their life because of betrayal. Many people are mourning because their loved ones has died because of betrayal. And many people, if not immediately, in the days to come, will be tormented by their guilty conscience for betraying their loved ones and their friends. Oh, the ugly face of sin, the ugly face of betrayal. But before we think that nobody can understand our pain, with brothers and sisters, Jesus experienced betrayals from his close friends, Peter and Judas Iscariot. How painful it must have been for Jesus to come face to face with betrayal, to look at the eyes of his friends with whom he had perhaps shared a few jokes as they took several ministry journeys, sharing miracle meals together. But I must tell you, my friends, that Jesus took the sin of betrayal to the cross and nailed it. His love and forgiveness are greater than the sin of betrayals. He prayed, Father, forgive them because they do not know what they are doing. Jesus prayed for his persecutors, his abusers, his killers. If you have been agonized by the experience of betrayal at some point in your life, or you are feeling guilty of betraying somebody, may Jesus comfort and grant you and your family the strength and healing. And if you have betrayed anyone and you are living in guilt, tormented and accused by a conscience, know that Jesus had crucified this sin of betrayal on the cross. Go to the cross. Go to Jesus and receive this forgiveness through his blood on the cross for you. And now stop your life of betrayal. As Jesus would often tell his people, now go and do not sin anymore. Apart from the ugly face of sin, betrayal, we also see the ugly face of law keepers breaking law. Law keepers breaking law. Annas and the chief high priest Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Matthew 26, Luke 23, we will see all these stories. On the night Jesus was arrested, the temple guards and the Roman soldiers took him to Annas and Caiaphas, the chief priest. The religious leaders began the process of investigation to dig out some evidence so that they can use them to nail Jesus. According to the Jewish law, it is illegal for the court to try criminal proceedings against a victim or an accused at night. A Scottish Bible commentator puts it like this: all criminal cases must be tried during the daytime and must be completed during the daytime. Criminal cases could not be transacted during the Passover season at all. Moreover, if a person is arrested during the day, a night should elapse so that before the verdict and judgment is given, mercy may come to the people. And finally, false witnesses was punishable by death. That was the Jewish law, civil law that we see. But the question is, did the law keepers fulfill the law? No. The Jewish law keepers broke their own laws in several ways. First, they began the criminal proceedings against Jesus at night, which was illegal. Second, they handled the criminal case during the Passover festival, which is prohibited. Third, instead of letting a night elapse before passing a verdict or judgment to evoke feeling of mercy, no, they conducted the criminal proceedings at night so that no feelings of mercy may arise. Fourth, the chief priest and the council tried to cook up false testimonies, subverting the law that false witness is punishable by death. Matthew 26. So the ugly face of sin is not only betrayal, but injustice, prejudice, lack of mercy, and blatant disregard for the written law to propagate their self-interest. The law keepers broke the law. You can imagine what Jesus had to undergo when the whole judicial system was rigged to condemn him. When every power center of Jerusalem was conspiring to annihilate him, the Jewish religious leaders broke all possible laws so that Jesus is crucified. This is the ugly face of sin. Now we can ask this question: did the law keepers stand up for justice in Manipur? The people who were empowered to protect the people do their duties? Is it possible for common people to take laws into their hands for several hours without the knowledge of the law keepers? These are questions raised by many people, and perhaps we will never get an answer. As internet is shut down and news is not coming from the state, we do not have adequate knowledge or information to know the truth. But eventually, of course, truth will emerge from different parts of the state. Law-keeping people breaking the law is another ugly face of sin we find in the Bible. But again, Jesus went to the cross to crucify all this. The sin of injustice, prejudice, lack of mercy, manipulation of truth. He had nailed them to the cross. If you and I and people in the future, as they reflect, are guilty of this offense, and you want to receive forgiveness of sin from Jesus, confess your sin and receive this forgiveness and healing. This is the ugly face of sin, and this need not torment you forever. There is healing and forgiveness in Jesus. If you have been a victim and deeply wounded by injustice, prejudice, lack of mercy, and manipulation of truth, know that God can give you healing and strength. And also know that one day all these things will be healed when Christ returns. He will wipe every tear from our eyes. Let us be hopeful even in this time of trial and great suffering. The ugly face of sin is not only betrayal and law-keepers breaking the law, but humiliation, contempt, and mockery. And this is what Jesus faced when he was presented to Herod, Pilate, and on the way to Calvary. Luke 23, John 19. Now Pilate sent Jesus to Herod after knowing that Jesus was from Galilee, because Galilee comes under the jurisdiction of Herod the Great. Herod was pleased to see Jesus sent to him because he had heard many things about Jesus in the past. And he hoped, the Bible says, and he hoped that Jesus will do a miracle or two in front of him to entertain Herod. Jesus was questioned by Herod in front of the religious leaders who vehemently accused Jesus. But not finding any fault that tantamounts to crucifixion, he sent Jesus back to Pilate. But after Herod treated Jesus with contempt and mocked him, and then arraying him in splendid clothing, in a purple cloth, John says, in John 19:5, he sent Jesus back to Pilate. The ugly face of sin is looking down at people, treating them shabbily, treating people with contempt and mockery, by removing dignity and self-respect, because people bear the image of God. Removing that dignity is sin. The ugly face of sin is vandalism, treating the properties of others with contempt and mockery, burning down houses, vehicles, and all the valuable things of the family. The ugly face of sin is also robbing and stealing the properties of the victims, either going into their houses and stealing all their belongings, or robbing the victims as they run out from their houses, catching them and robbing their belongings on the road itself as the victims run for their dear life. The ugly face of sin, contempt, and looking down at people and causing harm on people. But again, my dear friends, Jesus experienced contempt, mockery, and humiliation. Later we will find that as Jesus was led to the cross, they made a crown twisted with thorns and pierced it on Jesus' head. Humiliation and pain magnified. The soldiers blinded Jesus, punched his face, spat on his face, and asked him, "Who beat you?" They laughed. They lynched him. He was treated worse than an animal and was not with much cloth when he was crucified. Dishonor and indignity. So if we want to see the full expression of ugliness of sin, look at what was done to Jesus at the cross. On the cross, the religious leaders, soldiers, and even a robber taunted, ridiculed, and mocked him, saying, "If you are the Son of God, get down the cross, and then we will believe in you." My friends, our people have experienced much pain and humiliation. Their tears, your tears, and your sorrow are inconsolable. But if we think that we have experienced contempt, mockery, indignity, humiliation, and dishonor more than other people, more than others, wait for a minute. Jesus experienced it first, and Jesus experienced it full. He experienced the full measure of sin against him. And so as Jesus console, comfort, and understand your pain, we have to know that the one who has experienced all this pain is comforting us and is giving us strength. He knows where it hurts and pains the most. Now the good news again is that he has taken all this to the cross. There he crucified them. So the power of sin and the power of the flesh may be defeated. Now if you and I are carrying this burden, give them to Jesus. He will carry it for you. Because he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Now may you find rest and healing. The ugly face of sin also is compromise of truth in the face of pressure. Where do we see this? We see this in the life of Pilate in John 19. Pilate did not find the people's charge made against Jesus as enough for his crucifixion. It was not strong enough to condemn Jesus to the cross. So he sent him to Herod. But Herod, after humiliating Jesus, sent Jesus back to Pilate because he also could not find strong evidence to crucify Jesus. So Pilate said to the people, "I find no sin in Jesus. I am going to set him free." But the people did not relent. Pilate said that I'm going to flog Jesus and then set him free. Pilate's wife even told Pilate that I have strange dreams concerning Jesus. Don't do anything to this man. And then Pilate was already attempting to free Jesus. He tried 3 times. But every time the people said, "No, crucify him, crucify him." Now the time when the people said, "If you free Jesus, you are no friend of Caesar." At this, Pilate changed his mind. He handed over Jesus to the people and washed his hand publicly to symbolically show that he was not guilty, he was innocent. But is Pilate innocent? A scholar writes that Pilate is still washing his hands on the other side, the blood stains that will never leave his hands. The ugly face of sin is compromising in the face of pressure, personal loss of face or reputation or political power and connection. Now Pilate had the authority to let truth prevail, but he compromised. He wanted to please the crowd, the mobs who chanted, "Crucify him, crucify him." He realized that power and good reputation comes by pleasing the people. He also wanted to please the central government, Caesar. He did not want to be seen as the enemy of Caesar. If so, he would risk his chair, he would risk his authority, he would risk his privilege, his honor, and his reputation. Now the ugly face of sin is seen when leaders in authority in the society compromise the mandate people have given to them, that they may serve, that they may love, that they may protect, that they may defend as enshrined in the Constitution. When they do not do this, the rioters taking control of the situation and destroying the fabric of love and unity in the society. When leaders do not stand up against injustice, against all this, we see that sin is prevailing in the society. When leaders sacrifice the sacredness of love and unity, but instead focuses to defend their reputation, cheer, authority, connection, and honor to gain political brownie points, it becomes tragic. Only time will tell what happened to the leaders in Manipur. Only time will tell. But my point is, Jesus experienced that in the hands of the political leaders in his time. But again, Jesus took the leaders' failures and self-centered wickedness to the cross and crucified him. No sin is left uncrucified on earth. No space is left unclaimed by Christ on this earth. Now, if we have failed in our leadership, if we have failed in any area, we need to come to Christ and tell him that I trade my sorrow, I trade my weakness and my sin and my suffering with you. You have died for me, you have crucified all this for me. Give me your forgiveness and take away my sin and cleanse me and redeem me. We do not need to live a life of guilt, a life of pain and suffering, because He can give us forgiveness, He can give us healing, and He can give us mercy. But as we go to Christ, we need to crucify our self-sufficiency, our pride. Now, the journey of Jesus via dolorosa, the way of suffering, was not a pleasant journey. It was the last journey of Jesus, and it was the ultimate journey for the ultimate sacrifice. The cross was heavy. Jesus was falling down repeatedly. After brutal flogging and blood loss, Jesus had to walk that path carrying a very heavy cross. So Simon from Cyrene was called to help him carry the cross of Jesus. The religious leaders must be grinning and smirking with victory as Jesus faltered and fell on the way. Galatians 5:19-21, Paul tells us about the deeds of the flesh, the ugly face of sin manifested in various ways. Is hatred, discord, fits of anger, self-ambition, dissension, etc. Now these were what the religious leaders felt as Jesus was walking towards the cross. The people, the religious leaders, were involved in an orgy of violence. But again, as Jesus went to the cross, He carried all the misdeeds of the flesh on His body, representing the full culmination of sin in the world on His body. He went to the cross. And so let me repeat, there is no space that Jesus had not claimed by His forgiveness. There is no emotion that has not been conquered by Jesus on the cross. There is no sin that He has not forgiven. So my appeal to those who have created this problem is accept Jesus, accept freedom, come out of guilt, come out of hell. And today, many people walk the path of suffering during these days. And remember that Jesus walked that path of suffering first. And as He walked that path of suffering, He sanctified that path. In other words, He is there to console people as they go through the time of suffering. Jesus walks with us. Today we may not be in that space of suffering like many people do in Manipur. But as we go through our own suffering, through our own difficult way, remember that Jesus walks with us in life's most narrow way. As people run away from their homes to different army camps and cities for refuge and protection, the Bible tells us Jesus runs with us. Jesus walks with you into the new city, into the new space where you think you are all alone. When Jesus is our shepherd, He leads us, He guides us, and the Holy Spirit is with us. And also remember, as Simon from Cyrene carried the cross for Jesus that day, today Jesus helps in carrying our cross as we mourn and suffer and cry. He walks with us and He helps us, He comforts us. My prayer is that all of us and our churches and our Christians in our region will be instruments of peace. May peace prevail in our society.